Okay, well, I just wanted to show you the progress that's being made on this one right here and how to add layer upon layer of these rose shapes here. So first off, I want to show that I've got my key here and I've been following the key with this one. And so obviously if I was to push this up real hard against here, it would crush the surfaces of the roses. So I'm being more gentle with it and using it pretty much as a guideline. So you can see here though that, there we go, that it does follow. It might not be perfect, but it's close enough that it's going to give me the shape that I want. And it's going to be consistent pretty much all the way around. Okay, so the first thing that I'd say is that I keep making the roses, like a whole bunch of them at once. And, I showed you once before, but it's really pretty easy. So if I had something like this, I'm just making a bit of a clay shape out of it, right? Cylindrical shape. And then I am rolling it out into a coil, at some point maybe splitting it off, rolling that coil a little bit thinner, right? And then flattening it out from there. Just bump, 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 bump. Bump, 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 bump. Right. Keep lifting it up every time I do that. Okay, and then pushing down this edge here so that I've got this skinny edge versus the thicker edge up here. I do that twice. I don't know. I think it's just better. So I got that, flip it over, do it again to make this edge really very thin so it breaks really easily and makes that nice petal shape. And then I'll do this, laying it out like this and rolling up that edge just like so. Just keep pushing it and it will probably tear at random places. And if it doesn't, you just give it a little bit of a pull and it will. Okay. And by doing them all at once too, it makes them about the same size. And that's really a little bit kind of easier to work with this piece right here. But there you go, you see done already, and so you can see that it's easy to get a whole bunch of things at one time. Okay, good enough. So now I've got this right here. And at certain points I've let it dry a little bit just so that it would be a little bit firmer because when it was wet and I just kept building it up, of course it gets kind of soft and does not want to hold its shape. Okay, I've raised up a ridge a little bit here, if you can see, because the roses, well, they're cone shaped, right? So they are going to be wider at this part and narrower at this part. So if I make a ridge, it will sit down into that. Now this ridge might be a little bit tall, as a matter of fact. So I think what I'm going to do is I did this a few days ago, so it's already gotten a little bit dry. Get a little bit of water on there and get my fork, get in there and really start digging it up, scoring real good. And then each one of these roses, I would take the time and I would score that up a little bit. This is a pretty advanced one, so you really have to have had a pretty good relationship with the clay if you're going to take on something like this, because you have to have, a firm touch in some places and yet a gentle touch in other places, and yeah. So, like I say, you really have to have built up that relationship to have that. Okay, so I keep scoring, just like so, and working that, pushing it into place the way that I want it. Push that down into there. Good, good, good. Don't want to flatten it, don't want to cover things up. Okay, and then check it against my key, right? So I got it here. I can see that this actually has to go in a bit as that starts to curve in. There, here. It's going to have to go in a bit. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So then the next thing is that I've got all these gaps in between the roses here. So what I would do is I'd just take a piece of clay like this, and I would start just breaking off pieces like this here, and making little wedge shapes, little cone shapes that I could just then stick into those gap areas. So forth and so on. Okay. And then I'm going to really rough up this area here behind it. So, supporting in the front here. Okay, and smoothing things out a little bit. I've added a little bit of extra water because, like I say, I did all this a few days ago and it's gotten a little bit dry since then. But you see, smoothing all that real good. And that is plenty thick enough and strong enough. And sometimes I've even added a little bit of extra slip or slurry, that wet clay into here to add a little bit more body if I needed to. So then what I would do is I would go ahead, getting ready to make the next row, and I would put some more of those wedge shapes in between right here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and add a coil to this to sort of fill up the space that is behind the roses here, sort of to make up for their wedge shape. Okay, so I'm just rolling out a quick coil here. Doesn't have to be perfect, just big enough so that it's going to be able to go around this guy right here. I'm going to score it up. Just a little bit of water on there because it was a little dry. And get this all mussed up over here. Get this added onto it. Okay, and then smooth that in. I always do this every time. I don't stack up coils without smoothing them in. I've just found, in my experience, it's just better. Just do it every time. I know it seems like it'd be quicker to get a whole bunch of them at once, but I don't know. Quicker's not always better. Good. Okay. So now here's where the fact that I made a bunch of these ahead of time is really going to help, right? So I can just go ahead and start getting these guys on. So there, and check it, especially now because I've got this coming in right here. So check it, check it, check it. Make sure it's not coming out too far. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Not perfect, but it's pretty good. Okay, so as I'm finishing up this row here, I want to go ahead and just check it against my key here and there. And it feels like it's a little bit wide over all around the top. So I can just take very gently, and push her in a little bit. I don't want to be crushing those petals. At the very end, I'll go back and we'll clean those up a little bit. But we want to get it to being as close to fitting that key as possible because that's what's going to give it a great overall shape. Otherwise, it could really turn it into sort of a formless mass of texture very easily. And it's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be perfect. But it has to be, close-ish. Kind of close. Not too bad. It's still, we're at the top here, so I got to keep kind of pushing it a little bit. Okay. So that's good. Good. Could be a little bit more there. Now's the time. Now is the time to mess with it. Okay. A little bit on that one. Just a little bit on that one. A little bit on that one. So some of them have to come back out a little bit. Okay, but good enough. All right, and so normally I would take and wedge little pieces in between the roses now. But because of the fact that I push them in and they're sort of have this wedge shape to begin with, that actually worked to my advantage. And yeah, sure, selectively a few places like I can see like right in here, maybe a little bit of clay would not be a bad idea. But maybe not near so much as I have done in the past, where it was actually expanding out instead of in. Okay, looking pretty good. And a little bit right here. Okay, and so now take and connect all those right away. Supporting it with the outside of my hand so it doesn't move. But meanwhile, really, really scoring up the back there. Alright, so I've scored up all inside here. So now I'm going to do the same around the ridge at the top here. Okay, so I've got it roughed up on the inside and the top here. But you know what? I would probably go ahead and just go over that whole thing again. I keep wetting my fork a little bit just to make everything glide a little bit better. But I just want to really make that surface in there very, very generic. And maybe the first time that I was cutting through what I was scoring, it went a long way. Maybe it went 70% of the way of what I really wanted to do, and it really, broke the hard ground, so to speak. But now, coming in here again, why not? Just take a few minutes, and then maybe that does that other 30% and really makes it 100% messed up in there, just the way I want it to be. See, I can see in here there's an area that has a real ridge underneath it. You can't really see it in here. I don't really see a way of making you see it. But here, by going over it again, I can really see that. I'll put a little bit of extra clay material in there, really mess it up, and then turning that weak spot into a homogeneous normal spot like everything else. Okay, and now before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and smooth that off real good. in there so that it becomes one consistent structure. Okay, so I think I've gotten this pretty good in here. If you can see it, but it's smoothed off pretty well. And I think that this is fine. I think that there's plenty of material and it's robust enough and it's sealed enough. But when you're dealing with these composite sort of things, sometimes, who knows? If it's not as robust, like some areas down here weren't as robust down below, or there might have been, I was afraid there might be little holes somewhere in there that wasn't sealing exactly tight. You could take a little bit of this slip-like material. It's just very soft clay. Okay, it has a lot of water put into it. And then I'd probably take my scoring tool, like my fork right here, just messing things up a little bit so it has something to grip to. Not near as deep of a scoring as I was doing before, right? And I could take and I could paint some of this into it. So if there was any gaps, any little holes, or if I just felt like I needed to add material to make it a little bit stronger, like I was saying, a little bit more robust, then I could just paint that into there, giving it a nice sort of thick coat, really working it in well. And so then, yeah, that would add a little bit more material and once again, make it a little bit stronger, seal things up, etc. So now, I'd sort of start that process all over again, just making a ton more of those little roses, right? Alrighty, well, let me see. So for my next row, it's going to have to curve back in this way. So I'm checking that, and I've got a whole bunch of roses made up. And I look at it, and I see like, well, it looks like I could use another ridge in here, a little bit more clay, like I was doing before, in order to support that. Okay, so I'm going to add the last layer now, and this one is going to flare out again, and so I'm definitely going to want to put a ridge here, because you can see like underneath here, right, that's going to definitely need a little bit of support as that comes out. Okay, so now what I've done is I went ahead and added yet another layer to this one, just sort of free-handed it, so to speak, making it, judging how wide it would be, and just taken and all the extra from the clay, from the roses, I added, the little bits maybe in between the roses, just to bulk that up a little bit, and have just really scratched that out. I want the roses to come out at the top and be sort of like the final element throughout. Okay. So now I'll just go ahead and start smoothing this. Okay, so I think I'm going to let this sit for a little bit now, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start sort of messing with the individual flowers. A lot of them, their petals have been crushed a little bit or whatever. I won't mess with every one. That'd just take way too long. It'd be ridiculous. But where I see something that's just really bad, I'll go ahead and just, kind of straighten things out and kind of neaten things up a little bit. Okay, so now I've pretty much finished constructing this piece right here. And, I'm always kind of struck how you can just take an idea. Here was the original drawing for this one, and then just turn it into a reality. It's kind of cool. So now I'm just going to spend a little bit of time finishing things up a little bit, So what I'm going to use is I'm just going to use paintbrush like this and a little bit of water. And I'm just going to go through. The paintbrush is going to be sort of a softer thing that I can take, and some of the rose petals might have been kind of cracky, kind of split, or gotten kind of crushed. And it won't take too long, especially relative to all the time that I've spent making this, to just go through and take a look at these various things. So for instance, I can see here where this one's got a nice petal, and I just have to decide, do I like this petal here, or do I not like the fact that it's covering up this rose that's underneath? And so if I wanted to, I could give it a little bit of a trim. I think that I'll just take and trim it just a bit with one of the carving tools. All right, there it is. And that way I've exposed that rose underneath it a little bit. Okay, and so just going through these guys, and I would just go down row after row, a little bit after a little bit, and make those decisions as to what I liked and what I didn't like. And so just going by, you can see where the edges are really rough on this one right here. So I just have some water and get in there and just rub, just gently rub with that paintbrush. And that will make those edges a lot smoother. All right, and if I wanted to open something up, you can see right in here, I could just take a tool like this and just open it up a little bit. You know, I don't want to spend all day on each one of these roses, but a little bit of time, because I've wanted to make it look good, and I've spent as much time as it as I have already. But if you're tackling a project like this, then you must already have sort of an inner sense of craftsmanship, and you must have the knowledge that it's always on the margins. Like, you can take something 90% of the way, and that's pretty good, but it's that extra 10% that takes it all the way to 100, or maybe that extra 20% that takes it to 11, that really makes a difference between something that's, well, that's nice, that's okay, and something that's like, wow, that's just really great. I can't believe, did you make that? That kind of thing. So it's just that extra little bit. So once again, just taking these guys here, and flower by flower, I'm going to go through, and I've done most of them already. It took me about, let's say, 40 minutes to go through and just smooth these guys out a little bit. When I saw something like this petal here, I'll just trim that away a little bit, smooth that off. And it just looks a little bit better to me. Why not?